Well, at the time this video would normally come out, it normally comes out, 12 o'clock on a Monday. We are roughly about 30 or so minutes from finding about who's the new prime minister for the country. And it's going to be Liz Truss. you know, we've been talking about this for months, going back at least almost a year at this point from when Boris Johnson really first started having troubles. And it was always going to come down to Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. And when it came down to that competition, the members wanted Liz Truss. But the problem is the party, like the parliamentary party, wanted Rishi Sunak. And we've already discussed yesterday the problems of how do you solve a problem like Rishi Sunak and the problems that it could cause for Liz Truss and the problems that he could cause for Liz Truss, certainly being on the backbenches as well, if he really wanted to. But the real person who is going to cause trouble for Liz Truss is going to be Boris Johnson. The worst kept secret in Westminster is that Boris Johnson is dreaming of a comeback. And if, Boris Johnson is dreaming of a comeback, well, this is going to be Liz Truss's nightmare. Because while he will be publicly, cheering her on, he will ultimately be secretly not only wanting a downfall, but when that downfall comes, oh boy, will he be leading the cheerleading section, calling for her to go. So, as always, before we do get into this, like I said, please do remember to hit that like and share and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And of course, there is the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, the YouTube thank you button down below as well. There's also the Pony Club button down below you can join as well. So, let's get on with this then. This story comes from The Guardian, with the title of Boris Johnson Dreams of a Comeback. It will be a nightmare for Liz Truss. And oh boy, is it one nightmare. You can just think of Boris Johnson dressed as Freddy Krueger stalking Liz Truss's dreams. So, making his final appearance in the Commons as Prime Minister, Boris Johnson tendered some advice to his successor. Don't break the laws that you've introduced yourself to curb a deadly pandemic. Don't lie to Parliament. Don't reduce the government to a trashy carnival of incompetence, sleaze, and mendacity. No, obviously, he said none of that. He instead offered this tip. Focus on the road ahead, but always remember to check the rearview mirror. That was actually sound advice. The rearview mirror of the next Prime Minister will be filled with a juggernaut-shaped, road-hogging, attention-craving, angry, bitter, and menacing presence. What a way to describe Boris Johnson. What a way. And that is very true, though. That is very true. He will be out for vengeance. That you can guarantee. And trust me, Boris Johnson is a creature of habit. And we have even seen him as Prime Minister go and try to take vengeance on the people he perceived to have wronged him. So he will go for some vengeance. Anyway, we continue. Mr. Johnson himself will be breathing down her neck. And we know from every unpleasant word he has uttered since Tory MPs acted to evict him that he burns with vengeful resentment. We know that he sees himself not as the architect of his own downfall, but as a victim of ungrateful rats, saying, I won these effers an election, he raged within his bunker when they moved against him. Having dreamed of a decade in number 10, he was ended up as just a 3-year Prime Minister, which is even harder for his monstrous ego to endure, because it is not only half as long as David Cameron, his rival since they were the denizens of the Bullingdon Club, but his hasta la vista, baby. He's signed off from the dispatch box, an unsuitable signal that he thinks he could conceive a Berlusconi-like return to power. When he formally surrenders the keys to number 10 to number 10 to the Queen on Tuesday, a large part of him will be thinking that this is not his farewell to the Premiership, merely an adieu. He will be encouraged by the thought that we will have been written off many times before, only to stage comebacks everyone else thought impossible. And that is true. He is the comeback kid. That is very, very true. Anyway, he continues. The quest may well be a fantasy, but his pursuit will fascinate his party and the media in a way that is bound to distract and destabilize his successor. A man whose only loyalty to himself will not care a jot about that. He has already played an instrumental role in the destruction of 3 Tory premierships, those of Mr. Cameron, Theresa May, and his own. And I assume, as pollsters, politicians, and even civil servants all do, that the next tenant of number 10 will be Liz Truss. Hers will be a premiership beset by perils from day one, and he will have no compunction about exploiting her vulnerabilities if he thinks it serves his ambitions. He has told friends that his first priority is to, quote, put the hay in the loft, under the arrangements made by ex-prime ministers that he will be entitled to claim over £115,000 a year from the taxpayers. This will sicken many of those trapped in the savage jaws of the cost of living crisis. To him, it will be chicken feed. He spent the premiership moaning to pals that he couldn't live on only a salary that was just up to his eyes in debt. Now he will seize this opportunity to make stacks of cash. Some of the money-making avenues taken by ex-prime ministers don't look viable to him, though. The corporate world bores him, and companies are likely to belch at his reputation of risk and giving him a very broad seat to a disgraced ex-prime minister. His memoirs could attract a massive audience, and speculation has gone north of at least £1 million. But politicians usually only turn to memoir writing when they have accepted that their race is run. He also owes a publisher a book about Shakespeare, which he can only draw on his own personal experiences and fratricidal struggles and treachery, and of course illicit sex. The easy route to quick riches, of course, will be making speeches, especially to audiences in America, his country of birth. People have been prepared to pay $100,000 to sit through an hour or so of Mrs. May, so he ought to be able to fill his boots. He will also revive his career as a newspaper columnist at The Telegraph, which he once described as his real boss, and of course The Mail, which will campaign ferociously to keep him to number 10, are all competing to try and provide him with a very richly rewarded, high-profile bully pulpit. His new employer will not want to pay the big money for opinion pieces blandly supportive of his successor. His paymasters will expect him to make mischief, and he wants to stir up to try and keep himself in the spotlight. One senior Tory predicts, saying, he will be goaded on by his advocates to be the oppositional. He is well practiced at playing the prince over the water while subverting the Tory leader of the day. He combined being Mayor of London and, of course, later Conservative MP with writing a column for The Telegraph during the Cameron premiership. And it was a cause of such constant nervousness and apprehension to Mr. Cameron that his aides used to refer to it as Boris's weekly mindfuck. He will wish the new Prime Minister, of course, every new success while aching for her to fail, to try and satisfy his vanity and to secure his own historical reputation. He needs to be seen as the exceptional Tory of his generation, the only one capable of securing a big majority. He will want to cultivate 2 false narratives. One, that the battalion of troubles that will besiege his successor will have been nothing to do with him, and like his awful he will still be in number 10. And of course, 2, that his colossus was brought down by pygmies. A lot of effort has gone into try and propagate the myth that the Lion of Brexit and the hero of Ukraine was stabbed in the back by scheming Remainers in the deep state and the craven snakes and the polymus of the Tory MPs. And this is, of course, utter baloney. But it will be the balcony from which his appetite within the Tory tribe will sit, saying, "My party can have a weakness for betrayal narratives," remarks one former Tory cabinet minister, observing that it took Tories more than a decade to get over the fall of Margaret Thatcher. This phony but potential betrayal narrative will also be allowed to flourish during the contest to replace him. At the onset, it was assumed that any successor would want to distance themselves from his very tawdry regime in order to put and trying to convince the country that a new prime minister represents a fresh start. Miss Truss has instead surrounded herself with Johnsonites and pampered to the rump of his worshippers within the Tory party by expressing frequent regrets that he was removed. This she may live to rue. There are lots of reasons to think that the notion of a Johnson comeback is delusional. He leaves office extremely unpopular with voters. Only a recent poll that he was topped with was one of the worst prime ministers since the Second World War. However, despite becoming despite how desperate things become for the party, Conservative MPs are probably not quite so unhinged to give him a second act at number 10 to a man who has first discredited their party. He has very few genuine friendships at Westminster, and some Tory MPs think that he won't have the stomach for brooding on the backbenches. There is also a tension with his desire to amass wealth, because he will be obliged to declare all his extracurricular earnings. So as long as he remains an MP, there is, of course, the investigation as to whether he lied about Parliament and about Partygate. He will see this as a moral threat to any hopes of his comeback. Having tried and failed to prevent the inquiry by the Privilege Committee, he has now sought to try and besmirch it by spinning that it is a kangaroo court. And even though a majority of its members are Conservative MPs, and is being advised by a former appeal court judge. In his final week of office in Downing Street, he will use public money to pay for contentious legal opinion attacking the fairness of the committee's proceedings. Labour calls this attempt to intimidate some of the senior Tories, and they agree. It is outrageous to try and nobble the committee, says one former cabinet minister. It's very Trumpian. The hearings are dangerous to him because they will take evidence from police officers, civil servants, and even himself under oath. If he can prevent that, he will try and cast doubt on the legitimacy of a guilty verdict in the hopes of persuading MPs to even reject or even soften any penalties the committee might recommend. Suspension from the Commons for more than 10 days would allow his Oxbridge constituents to petition for a boycott election to throw him out. If how he handles this will be a very early test of integrity for the very savvy of Miss Truss's attempt. At any part to try and stymie the investigation would ignite outrage and be taken as confirmation that she is Boris Johnson in heels. Her interest would only be served by his removal from the Commons. The road ahead is highly hazardous as it is. The last thing she needs is his predatory shadow in her rearview mirror. And I completely agree there. I completely agree with that statement. You know, he will be stalking the backbenchers. You know, he will be the shadow in the rearview mirror of Liz Truss. And even then, if he gets, you know, cast out of the Commons, he will still be writing his, you know, number 10, I don't know, maybe the ex-prime minister's voice in, I don't know, the Mail or even the Telegraph. As you said, they're competing to try and attract him over. I think that's entirely possible. I think that is entirely possible that they will be coming for him. Absolutely. Absolutely. They will want that. And they will want someone who will be willing to attack the prime minister, to subvert, you know, the current, you know, Tory party direction, which will be interesting to say one thing. But we'll have to see how this all turns out. Like I say, we are probably at this moment minutes away from finding out who it is. And ultimately, as it said, all the bookies, ministers, even civil servants all think it's going to be Liz Truss. So I suppose we'll just have to wait and find out. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.